We're in business.
We're in business. We're going to talk about the future of work. And then tomorrow we'll talk about the future of business. We won't. We're never going to talk about the future of business. Just
Oh,
work.
you and me are going to talk about the future of business. Our business is plural.
Businesses.
Yes.
Why do you want to talk about the future of work?
I'm fascinated by it. I think there are, again, this is perspective seeking. I have like a couple of tightly held, strongly held positions, but I think by and large, it's perspective seeking. I don't think you introduce all of the technological tools that are available today and work doesn't change. And I think one of my strongly held positions is that it's going to change differently than what the common narrative is. So,
what's the common narrative? Give me the straw man.
That that people are going to lose their jobs. Technology is going to replace people. And
see, I'm in a bubble. I'm in a bubble where all I read is the stuff that says that I only read the counterpoint to that. So everything I read is talking about how machines won't take jobs, and then I end up with 100% inputs are saying the widely held belief that the machines will take your jobs it's all debunking. But if 100% of what I'm reading is debunking, and none of what I'm reading is the original bunking, only the debunking. Anyway, so the common narrative is that machines are going to take the jobs, and the future of work is more subtle than that.
I agree, or that's my position. I think we dove right in today. I don't know. We usually.
I was doing homework. I was looking up how old is the future of work.
Well, I mean,
so that's why I wanted to launch into
that's always been a concept, right? I mean, there's always, we do things a certain way today, and in some increment of time looking out, it's going to be different than we do it today.
Well, unfortunately, since I said John Maynard Keynes out loud in a house surrounded by retargeting campaigns, when I searched for who coined the term future of work, I got the first 6 results all mentioned John Maynard Keynes and technological unemployment.
I love it.
And now I can't tell the difference between whether that's a genuine result or if that's me being fed a response to what I was already told.
Both can be answers that are correct.
That's true. That's true. So the future, the actual words, the future of work as like a catchphrasey kind of thing, go back at least 6 or 8 years to the management consultancies. But then the same exact principles kind of are widely traced to sort of the late 30s, kind of the tail end of the beginning of the current industrial age.
Well, what was the narrative then versus now? I'm curious. Similar.
Well, okay. So what I found was machines make jobs was like so there was the machines are going to take jobs. Then it was the machines actually produce or not produce jobs. Nothing produces a job, but the machines are advantageous to increasing employment because they increase productivity and efficiency. And then there was backlash against that, although I'm not sure the backlash was accurately aimed. I mean, aiming it at the machines versus aiming it at I use a machine at work and it makes me more productive and I don't get to enjoy the gains from that additional productivity. I don't think that's the machine's fault, per se.
Here's a subtlety that I think is the prism that I see this through. All of that conversation of increments of labor that are automated and retraining and all of that is one thing. But I think everything that's been discussed historically continues to put the corporation, a centralized power structure, at the center of employment and at the center of work. And I think that's a subtlety that doesn't get discussed at all, that I think is going to change. And here's why. Mark me down for this. Mark me down. This is a flag that I will plant. The vast majority of Fortune 500 companies, excluding FANG, excluding Amazon, Microsoft, probably a handful of others, but the vast majority of Fortune 500 companies do not currently have, nor will they have, the technical sophistication to deliver digital solutions at scale. I think it's a hard stop. You and I both have had front row seats to this in practice. And I think there's a concept, at least digitally, but I can see it in other ways as well. In technical labor, I'm going to lump digital in with the phrase technical labor, service technicians, etc. I want to introduce a concept. It's not new, but microservices. I think that the corporate structure is going to be decentralized. I think it should be. I think companies who build widgets should focus on building widgets, and they're not good at the rest of it. People who are good at the rest of it should do the rest of it, and I think that's coming. I think it's just a new, especially digital. It might start with digital. I see a lot of overlap between digital and technical labor. So I think there's this, I'm not going to give away my hand too soon. I think there's an overlap that makes sense for a microservice provider, plural, starting with digital only, that evolves to include digital and technical. So technicians partnered with machine learning engineers, not affiliated with the corporate. Corporations may contract them. Corporations may summon them like other folks summon them. The vast majority of corporations, especially those that are trying to deliver digital solutions as an offering, don't have the technical capabilities to do it. So I think there's a disruption that once / if it gains momentum, could really change the future of work.
I come at this mostly from a industrial perspective. So parts manufacturing, factories, that kind of thing. And I have cheat mechanisms to figure out how to look at this stuff and how to think about it and analyze it in a way that will help me understand what's happening now and what's about to happen. So I like to start with what's a mature example, right? So in the IT space, server space is pretty mature.
Infosys and Atos are good examples. There are examples of this model all over the place. Infosys, a lot of companies, large companies, contract Infosys or Atos to run their IT services.
Yeah. Right. And I think that in parts manufacturing, the microservices, like you can just translate microservices into supply chain management or into supplier management, where you have, a minority of machine shops have a paint booth in-house, right? So if you're a specialist in cutting metal, you generally, it takes up a lot of space to have a powder coat booth. You have to have a specialist who knows how to do powder coat. If you take a machinist and put them on powder coat, that machinist now can't be cutting metal, which was your core business. So it's very common to send machined parts out for powder coat. However, machine shop owners, of all sizes, are constantly going back and forth about, do we send our powder, or do I send our stuff out for powder coat, or do we bring powder coat back in house? Do we have anodized because we're mostly aluminum? Do we do that in house? Do we have, what are our finishes, and where do those finishes come from? And I like that example because it's extraordinarily narrow, right? It's really just steel and aluminum parts, that have to have something go on, it's paint, right? Like for all intents and purposes, this is, do we paint it or do we just make it and somebody else paints
But
it?
you've beautifully laid out the reason why I think this is going to really be disruptive in the digital side. Is I think the gulf between the technology and the vast majority, high 90s%, it's very high 90s% of the population that understands how the technology is made, that gulf continues to widen. In your example, people understand those systems. That's not a it's there that's a cost determination. It's not a complexity. Complexity is not the barrier to entry there. Maybe cost via complexity. But in the case of computer science and applied artificial intelligence and applied machine learning and data collection and autonomous systems, the gulf between the general management companies, the executive leadership, I would say, of every single Fortune 500 company doesn't understand how to write code. They don't understand how code's written. The gulf, and so I think people have the determination, and that's not a cut. It's just it's changing. It's evolution of knowledge. I think the prior generations have always been fairly close technologically to understanding what it was that they did. So if I'm GE in the 60s, 70s, 80s, choose your decade, the executive leadership understands mechanical systems. They understand turbines and pumps and these mechanical systems. They grew up designing them. This is a different ballgame. This is
I think it's speed and its size, right? So
sure.
the number of components to the system is exponentially higher than it was not that long ago. Half a decade, 1 decade ago. So certainly the size of the number of components in an IT system the number of components grows faster, and the management of them gets out of control faster, and the speed with which things can be iterated on or changed or decisions can be made, all that goes up. I do think that in practical terms, you could have been having a very similar conversation to this when, again, like I'll use the GE example of pick your era. you know the notion that everything is in-house and expertise, that's been a give and take and a push and pull from the beginning of the industrial revolution. So I know machine tools is the industrial history that I know the best, and starting in the 1850s or so, that was when you would have just never ending uh, agglomeration, new entrants, consolidation, deconsolidation. So merger and acquisition activity was quite frothy, and company creation, combining, and destruction was also quite frothy. So this was things like, if I'm a maker of gears, am I a specialist in gear making, or do I know how to make gears really, really well because that's a critical component to my rotating equipment? Or if I know how to wind a spindle with copper wire, do I also need to know how to make copper wire, or do I need to know how to wind a spindle with somebody else's copper wire? And the thing that's constant is change, right? So what's happened at all points is there's always been fluidity about, who knows how to do what, how do they get it from place to place, and how do you make it so that you have, a team sport as the team gets bigger, and like you're talking about a gigantic, unmanageable, epic society-wide team, right? That's managing modern IT systems, or I guess more accurately is literally not managing them, right? Like that's the whole point, is they're not managed. I think I would say that if you were sitting in the same position as an industrialist at the end of the 19th century, you'd have all the same feelings about the complexity being too much to control. I have no way to prove that other than, go to the journals of the people whose names made it to industrial
See,
companies.
I'm going to disagree. I'm going to disagree strongly, and I think the example that I'll give again, you brought it up. It's hard to bring metrics out to make more than anecdotal arguments, but I will say this: my father and his generation My dad was not an educated man, but he understood mechanical systems. He worked on his car. He could do things to the house, systems to the house. So for him, had he been in leadership in a company, it was a smaller degree of separation for him to understand the things that you just explained. He understands copper wire and those sorts of things. He
Hmm.
understands how to make
Hmm.
judgments about what he can and can't do as a company because he's closer to the technology from an awareness standpoint.
Right.
Today, that gulf is ever widening. And I think it's people make the mistake of thinking younger generations grow up with technology, so therefore they're going to have a better handle on this. Hard,
I think that's an important
hard
point.
stop. Hard stop. I think younger generations grow up using the end product, so they know how to do apps or take a lot of pictures or use things on a computer that older generations didn't. There's less of an awareness of how to write code, how to and we're just talking about the fundamentals of computer science. We're not talking about how you make that work for delivering solutions like in applied AI or data collection or autonomous systems. The gulf between, it's not going to improve, it's going to get worse. The gulf between what corporate power structure centers technologically, what they're able to understand, the awareness that they have, and what they're trying to execute is only widening. They can't do what they're trying to do. And it's not a cut. It's just we're moving. I think that the nuance that everyone misses is that they assume that these corporate structures can make this technology work because that's been the model for forever. Corporate structures are not innovate. It's where innovation goes to die. I'll die on that hill too. Corporate structures are processes, and that's needed. You take a something that you've built and you make a process that can be scaled nationally or globally. This is different. They're process oriented. They don't have the corporate structures rely on process. The old model of someone does something new that fills a hole in your portfolio, so you go buy them. They're still trying to do that. And even Fang, even the really advanced technological companies have a hard time assimilating some of these new technologies into their portfolio. God forbid an industrial company is really, I think at a certain point, analysts valuing and evaluating industrial companies just need to discount that they're going to have any sort of digital presence outside of the connectivity of their equipment. So our
I Go
no,
ahead. Go ahead.
I'm on a tangent, and it's not like I think this is a subtlety that I think no one really thinks about, but once you see it in action, is going to catch on like wildfire because it solves a whole bunch of problems, and we can talk about the labor aspect of that.
You need to tell me more about how this is different from corporate management and the Harvard Business Review articles from the early 90s, because it seems awfully similar to the stuff that, as globalization became a thing and as fear of Japanese manufacturers dominating the US market, that's, this stuff it seems like it's well-trod ground. So maybe I'm missing some subtlety or nuance to what you're trying to say.
It's the complexity of there are the prior art on this being solved or salvaged was again the degree of awareness, the standard deviation of technological awareness of the equipment or the technology that's being developed. Folks understood even when you got into miniaturization of components and as things got smaller, they still understood, okay, this is still a controller. It's just smaller and runs faster. I don't need to know that there are more there are more circuits on this chip to know that this is still the same thing. It's just small. It's better. This is different. This is a
Yeah, I think by the 70s that had started to erode really, really aggressively in the spaces I'm used to. So the back and forth you see in machine tools is essentially everybody who started a machine tool company and got their name on a lathe or milling machine or a grinder or like a planer machine, a planer mill or something like this. These are old school, means of production type equipment. Those guys were by and large the ones who designed the machine, and then their son carried on the company, and then their grandson picked up the company after that. And by the time it got to the third generation, there started to be some deviation away from being equipment designers, manufacturers, and engineers by trade, right? Like that was no longer the management of the company by the time you got to the third generation. Part of that was because the times were changing. Part of it was because there was more flexibility or accessibility to education to go out and get a degree in finance, financial arts as opposed to engineering. Part of it was because some of those kids just didn't want to be an engineer or didn't show the aptitude for it, so they didn't pursue that. So across the entire industry, at least as far back as the 80s, the trend was, as you started to see really heavily globalized sort of conflict oriented manufacturing, where you're sort of picturing this is the US and our manufacturing base, and we are in direct competition with foreign, mostly Asian manufacturers who are, loading our shores with cheap imported goods the rhetoric is of dubious quality, blah 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 blah. So that led to a pivoting out of the engineer core in ownership and towards other business functions. So you get to like the bean counter era. And then as you get through the bean counter era, then there's basically like a sales era where, there's been 3 rounds of consolidation. A lot of the major US companies that were, a German immigrant to the United States starts a company in Cincinnati, goes through 3 generations. It's been consolidated into a larger, Cincinnati based machine tool builder of some kind. And then that company has either been split up and spun off with pieces of it sold to a Japanese company, or all of it's been sold to a Japanese company, but you still have, American management in place. And now you get to a decade or a decade and a half where, okay, we're now representing machines that have been built all around the world, but we have to sell them to American manufacturer customers. So then you had salespeople end up as the executives. And it wasn't until the 2010s that you had 3 or 4 decades worth of non-engineering leadership, at least in terms of United States manufacturers of production equipment. Those engineers started to be those the engineers came back basically and got another round of leadership and ownership. And by that point, it was, I won't say they were digital native in the sense of a young person who grew up playing Minecraft. I'll say they were digital native in the sense that there had never been a meaningful part of their career where you didn't have CAD files associated with equipment, and those people started to run things again in the 2010s in this little sub segment that I know a lot about.
And I think that probably translates to a broader segment of the industrial base too. But I come back to, there is all of what you described, I agree with, but let's go back to the 80s and that subsegment where, whoever's the sales person, even if they didn't design or build this machine tool or this press or whatever the equipment is, they're close enough to the awareness of how this mechanical technology works that they know how to sell that. They can conceptually understand the technology and develop the relationships. Now, the sales process has changed. A lot of these processes have changed. Manufacturing processes have changed. But again, I come back to the focal point, the product, the good is very well understood by a broader group of people technologically. The technological good is more understood. It's more mechanical. They understand the components that make up the good. These are physical systems. They know what copper is. They know what motors are. They know what pumps do because they have these things in their system. And in a lot of instances, even if you're not an engineer, you've worked on this thing because prior generations, and we'll talk about this next week, specialization, but prior generations by default had to know more about how these things worked because they had to, they couldn't afford to bring someone in to replace every system in their house. The point is the gulf between the average worker, choose your function in corporate America, the understanding the average worker's understanding of the technologies, and I'm siphoning off, I'm putting a wall around digital technologies. They still understand the widgets their companies make, even if those, as those have evolved technologically too, they still understand those. I've worked for companies that sell, building equipment or sell manufacturing equipment, automation control. The vast majority of the workforce, whether sales, marketing, executive assistant, you name it, they still understand the technology. Digital is a different animal. People don't understand it. It doesn't mean they can't use Instagram or Facebook or apps that leverage that technology. Younger generations are very fluid with that, or gaming. But the number of people that could fix a pump 40 years ago, let's call it 50%. Who knows if that's accurate? The number of people that can write code or fix code that's broken on their computer today is below 3%. There are very few people that can manage the technology today and understand how it works, how you create it, how you build it. How are companies, and I think they should abandon it. I think I'm calling on industrial companies in my lowly position, but abandon digital. You're not going to do it. You're burning through cash.
I think we're very much on the same side about the ability to grasp complexity. I don't think there's any question about where we stand today in terms of ability to grasp complexity. I think that we will go to the grave unable to agree on when modernity started and when the modern times started and when that became a thing. Because I think it's because I'm mainly contrarian. So when I hear about how they don't do it like they used to, I get really fascinated with, how did it used to be? And so then I'm selecting out as I look through, business history or manufacturing process history or early computing history or pre-computing history or the history of, sales and product and business. And I'm thinking, I'm really thinking about what did somebody who was selling off a poster and a pamphlet, and they were going on a train from place to place to place with a briefcase. I'm not thinking in terms of like what's different between them and us now that I can just have a video call and post stuff on, reach out to somebody to try and sell my stuff through the internet. I'm not so much thinking about what's different. I'm imagining, and it's purely a flight of fancy thing. I'm like imagining what is the same about what you have to do then and what you have to do now. Not in terms of like selling and selling, in terms of the actual process, keeping track of who you called on, keeping track of where you need to go. How do you get yourself educated on, if I have a suitcase full of, non-nutritive cereal varnish, which is the product that Clark Griswold works on in Christmas Vacation. Anyway, that's a deep pull. My non-nutritive cereal varnish suitcase. How do I know which one is good? How do I know what the competition is up to? And all of this type of stuff as the day-to-day of how do I do this? My grandfather sold machine tools. I didn't know this until I entered the machine tool industry. Cool. And yeah, well, except that it was just a job. Like everybody knows that he didn't know anything about machine tools. Like everybody knows this.
That's my point, though. That's my point is I think it's probably easier for people today. You have a lot of tools at your disposal.
Yeah, but he died in 1993 and he didn't know anything about machine tools when he was selling them, 25 years before that.
Yeah. I think that
I'm going to call it right now. Modern times started in 1994 with the death of Kurt Cobain. That's the bar. So we're just going to use from now on, anytime we're debating about a nuance or a degrees or a yes, but when, or but for how long, we're just going to say, was it before or after the watershed, which is 94?
BKC.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's basically like BC or AD, but more relevant to this exact conversation.
You're saying that in jest, but I think you're probably within a few years of the right at least anecdotally or sort of informally, the right sort of to this digital age. I think you're
Sure,
kind
yeah.
of in the ballpark for the right time. But
I love the yardsticks for what made for, you know, what how do you create a boundary line between, epochs or eras, or even just, things that are going to make people functionally very, very different. So stuff like, did you ever have a cell phone growing up, can be a huge difference between one set of people and another set of people. And it's mostly age based, but it's not entirely age based. Another one is, did you ever have the internet at your house growing up? Like, that's a big one. Uh, for me, I graduated from college right before the Great Recession, the 2008 recession. So for people that are within 5 years either side of me, it makes it, I relate much more to somebody 5 years older than me as far as how their life went after that than somebody that's 5 years younger than me. And then by the time you get to, 8 or 10 years younger than me, most of the effects had kind of been like shoved into this 5 year chunk of people that were all, graduating into a horrible job market. And most of that had kind of like eased up by 5 or 6 more years down the line. So I have 5 years of people after me where I'm like, I can't relate to these people at all, even though they're very close to me in age.
I think we're sort of, obviously, I'm a little older than you, but I think we're sort of fortunate.
I'm 29 and you're 31.
I'll take it. I have, my doctor tells me, just be, this, I'm very physically, I work out a lot and pay attention. I'm disciplined. And every physical, and I just had a bunch of lab work done, and my doctor, who's an older guy, an older Romanian guy, Croatian guy, will come out and say, every time, he's like, you've got the body of a 25-year-old. So I claim much younger biological age than number.
I'm gonna do my part and make sure that I have the body of a like 48 to 55-year-old. Maybe not on the outside yet. It's coming, but on the inside. Whew, do not send the yeah. Never mind. Let's move on.
Yeah, that's a anyway. Yeah, so I'm a little older than you, but I think I'm fortunate in that you're mentioning these sort of, I think noteworthy. 9/11 would be another. You're mentioning these recent history things, past 30 years things. Seems like every other year, anecdotally, there's something big like that. Well, largely my childhood was free of that. So I grew up in a very free, stable, peaceful, relatively here. Obviously, globally, there were issues. Cold War was pretty much over.
Yeah, like 85 to like 2001, you had the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Gulf War and a few other things, but none of them were as big as like 9/11.
Yeah. So, and none of them, media was consumed differently. So you got what the three channels told you. And I think folks didn't really, fear porn wasn't a thing.
Wait, hold on. What year are you talking about when there were only 3 channels of TV?
The 80s.
No.
For sure.
Maybe the early 80s.
I didn't have cable. A lot of households didn't have cable.
Did anybody in your neighborhood have cable?
I had a friend who did, and I'd stay the night with him.
Did you have, was access to VCRs and VHS tapes pretty easy for you?
We had one.
We didn't have I think we might have had a VCR, but we didn't actually own any tapes.
We got, I don't want to go, that's who cares about when we got what.
I think the point here is that the past of how you're raised and what you're raised on has an impact on how you approach the entire rest of your career. So the future of work is defined by the things that you interact with and you consume, and all of it is tied together, right? So if I'm able to use a keyboard and mouse, that means that I am able to meet the minimum bar for modern corporate work and a lot of other work. It doesn't mean that I'm a programmer, and the conflating of specialist digital work with generalist digital capability and what's the word I'm looking for? Proficiency, like basic bare proficiency is it's it can be misleading, and it can be tempting to conflate those two. Like my parents thought I was going to be an architect because I like playing with Legos. I grew up and I'm like, no, I just liked playing with Legos. Like they're a fun toy. This doesn't translate to me wanting to work at anything.
I've thought about this so many times, and I'm picking on Target just because this is what I remember. This is the example that I remember in my head. I love walking through Target 3-4 years ago. Seems like that's when the proliferation happened. And there were like all of these chemistry sets for kids and like all of these really advanced toys. And I thought, like that has any impact at all on whether or not a kid chooses to go into chemistry, or there's a lot more to it than the purchase of a chemistry set. Not that it's bad or good inherently. It's just, I think I see, I like to envision on the other side of that, you know, soccer family parents, picking up a chemistry set and thinking that means they're increasing the likelihood that their child goes to school and studies the science. And
Did your parents think you were going to be a baseball player?
I have done nothing that my family, nothing, like no aspect of what I've done is anything. I was supposed to work with my hands. Or
is your athletic achievement the highest of your close family?
Oh, for sure.
And did anyone even think about what the life of a post high school athlete would look like while you were growing up? Yeah. That shocked. I was pretty old before I met the first either people who had made it past high school and were pretty serious, or people whose parents had kids that had made it past it and were pretty serious. Some of it was baseball. Probably the people I knew the best, it was all baseball. And this was like, what does it mean to be getting scouted? And are you going to be choosing between going to college to play at school, or are you going to be scouted, and are you actually going to get picked up? And those sort of conversations I thought were imaginary things that only happened on TV. And it was definitely something else to hear that actually going on in people's discussion. And then also as I moved from place to place, we landed at the most populous and also most well-to-do economically place that I've lived growing up. And as soon as you had tons of people plus a lot of rich people, volume of those conversations went like through the roof compared to everywhere else. It used to, like the little towns I grew up, it'd be like there was the one guy who was going to go play ball in college.
Yeah.
And that was a huge deal.
It's a measure of status now. My child plays on this club team or this travel team, and people are spending a lot of money chasing those types of things. Whatever. I think there are advantages, but it's also, what I like about my parents' approach, and I think was more the approach generally of that time period, at least in the type of community I grew up in, is if you played a sport, it was truly because you wanted to play the sport.
Yeah, you wanted to play sports. So John Maynard Keynes told us that we would have technological unemployment where the machines took our jobs and let us enjoy leisure time. And our response to that was to turn kids' sports into a job.
By a lot.
Yeah,
I see it.
There's a lot of money. It's money. I mean, there's money in it too. Like you follow the dollars and follow things that function. And I don't know enough about sports to continue a sports conversation, so I'm going to rescue myself here. But it's the same thing talking to, call it like elementary and middle schoolers now, about what they would do as a profession. And this shouldn't have come as a surprise. Your kid's too old for this, but so this may come as a surprise to you, or maybe your kids aren't too old for this. But I heard the first time I heard an elementary schooler talk about what they wanted to be when they grew up, and they
YouTuber.
Said, no. Were your kids getting the YouTube? Did your kids want to be YouTubers, or their friends?
Well, I don't.
Are they too old for it?
My son is too old for it. My daughter doesn't care. She's an old soul.
Yeah. the so it's the so YouTubers, I think I could at least wrap my head around YouTube. I wasn't happy about hearing that in elementary school or wanted to be a YouTuber, but they were like, I want to be a streamer. And I'm like, I don't exactly know what that
I
is.
don't either.
And they're like, they want to play video games on a live stream on Twitch for money. And I'm like, I guess that's a career now. And if you are a kid and you're watching videos on the internet, I'm not going to even narrow it down to a platform, but if you're watching videos on the internet as a main part of your upbringing, it's like it's as visible as firefighter or chef or doctor or pilot or whatever. So why the heck not? And like nobody, like I don't think kids have grown up saying they want to become a middle manager really ever. The closest you'll get is they grow up and want to be a businessman because their dad is or their mom is or
Yeah,
something like
but
that. But
there's
the freaking
I think
streamer,
there's a healthy realism baked into I'm going to be a middle manager. I mean, maybe no one shoots for that, but there's a realism that I don't need to be seen. I want to do something that provides for my family and, so I can do the things
yeah.
that matter to me. Whereas,
I just assume that any kid who wants to grow up to be a middle manager will instead say they want to grow up to be rich, and then they become a middle manager.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong inherently with wanting to do well financially. I just don't.
No, of course not.
And I won't be one of those people. I also won't want to be one of those people, contrary to what you might think, that screams at the kids to get off his lawn about wanting to play video games as a career. But the question to ask, my pragmatic side, the first thing that I think of is how many of those jobs are there? If we're thinking of
Right. So it's actually not a future of work.
correct
It's a future of
delusionment
sort
and
of work.
disappointment.
Like it's a future of sort of work. It's the future of jobbishness. Like so take the contractification of careers. So things that used to be a career, you're going to be a taxi driver, you get your medallion, your medallion is handed down to your kids, blah blah blah, and that's like you take care of your taxi and your medallion, and you're a taxi driver. Now, like you pop in and out of the career of a rideshare driver, and the entire careerness of becoming a taxi driver or limo driver, that's kind of like out the window. And the job of I'm going to be a streamer, like you're not playing video games for money. The thing you're
Being
doing
seen.
is you are an
Yeah.
advertiser, right? Like you are the things you can sell are merchandise, advertising. You could sell like courses, I guess, but like what are you selling courses in? You can sell digital, like if you're going to design stuff in the game, you can sell like tie-ins where it's going to be your face on a character. But these are not things that are, if you actually look at the job as, do you want to do that thing? You're not doing that thing to do the job, right? And that sort of separation between the identity of the job versus the day-to-day of the job, I think is where, I think that's how you end up with legions of people who have somewhat difficult to describe day jobs, but they're still doing stuff that they like and is useful. Just because you can't explain it to somebody the same way you explain, well, a pilot gets on an airplane and flies the plane from A to B. Well, okay, you can't necessarily explain the same thing if your job is a data analyst, but you don't necessarily have to either, because you can like being a data analyst and you're providing value to this person and that person, this other person, and you go to your job and you provide the value and you come home and like if your 5-year-old wants to know what it is, you can't explain it as easily as a streamer, but whatever, they're 5, they'll grow up and they'll understand it later. You know what I mean? And that's fine. And so I think that the upside of future of work as of 2023 is looking at, here are all the things that digital technology enables, and here are all the new career paths that are open, and it's never been easier to program a robot, and you can become a work from home machinist, and these things are unheard of 20 years ago. The flip side of it is, are the social conventions and the business models and the business practices, are those going to evolve in a positive way, or are those going to devolve into everybody's a 1099 employee without any healthcare benefits, and you kind of have like the de-workification of work
So
as opposed to
you just brought up, I think, the biggest sort of friction point for decentralized
yeah.
labor are the quality of life, or the ancillary systems associated with centralized employment,
Hmm.
retirement, healthcare. A Are those as good? I think it's that gap is shrinking. Are things that you can get privately, not associated with group discounts through employers, but are the coverages and sort of ancillary systems as good as what you could get independently? Are they
Hmm.
ubiquitous? Do you have access to them? Are they going to break you financially? What are those ancillary systems as those get better? I think there's a
Right.
real place for improvements there to bolster the decentralization of labor. Those ans-
That's selling pickaxes.
well, I think so. The ancillary systems, I think there are, and then there's a from an end user standpoint. How do you reduce the friction for um, if I want to consume these microservices, how do I, how Uber as a platform can do that from a ride sharing perspective. But if I want a decentralized, I don't want to hire robot technicians. If I'm a manufacturing company, I want to have someone else provide that for me. How do I secure them? And I think that there are probably some advances there, but I think as the ancillary systems improve, I think that it's because I think that's what keeps a lot of people from jumping. There are a lot. We talked about knowledge work. There are a lot of sort of older subject matter experts that have all the domain knowledge of where they've worked. They leave and come back as a consultant. But how do you do that at scale, and how do you give younger folks the opportunity to do that as well? Because I think there's a model there.
I mean, it's a great example where people did that as retirees or near retirees, or when they were approaching Social Security retirement age, and that without a doubt that had an impact on people who watched them do that and followed suit without being close to retirement, right? So having seen it been done by somebody who amassed an entire career's worth of knowledge, there were there were a bunch of people, and this is mostly from my own specific experiences in manufacturing specifically, but you see this all the time at manufacturers. And then you also see, some section of people that are 20 or 30 years younger than those, boomerang consultants that come back to the company after retirement, basically picking up the exact same approach to their work and doing the same thing when they're 30 or when they're 40, not when they're 60 or 70. So I think that seeing the example of somebody else has done this uh, is really, really important. And because like basically every innovation in work is largely like it's incremental, and it's based on copycatting, right? So I'll continue to go back to machine shops as an example. Where do new machine shops come from? They come from machinists who go to the shop every day. They see a third generation owner, like, this guy's an idiot. I could do this. The only difference between me and him is he owns the machine and I don't have enough money for that yet. As soon as that guy can scrape together enough money to get a machine in a garage, bing bang boom, you've got a new machine shop, right? And whether that survives indefinitely or gets consolidated, or it was a terrible idea and actually the machinist had it all wrong, or if that guy ends up buying out the shop that he had left, like, all of these are options. And and that visibility of, I am watching what that guy who runs the shop, or owns, not even runs, but owns the shop, is doing, and I can do what he does. That sort of I can me tooism of I can also do that is critically important, because it reduces a ton of risk of, starting with, what do I do as the first thing? Like, what's the first thing
So
I
we'd
do?
be remiss in talking about the future of work if we didn't talk about, and this is fascinating to me because I've kicked around the idea. I don't know the first thing about it, but I think I could run it. Uh, there are tons, millions of small businesses. Think plumbing, small plumbing shops, probably small machine shops with near retirement owners that are available to be purchased. probably at reasonable cost. Millions of small businesses, but do younger folks, do younger generations have any desire to own a small plumbing or a handful of small plumbing companies? Could you make it work? And I think there's also a spot there for someone to innovate digitally and taking on new businesses. I've thought about, what would be the cost for entry into purchasing a plumbing company, or a mom and pop plumbing company or two. You know?
Huge number of people in my direct immediate circle have taken that plunge
Cool.
specifically and said, I see a gap where there is no apparent management or leadership coming in next to a robotic system integrator or to a machine shop or to equipment builder, and the logic is precisely what you described. It's basically, this thing is going to be available at something of a discount, primarily because there is no plan for what
Yeah.
happens next. And there may be some value to the business, but there is also obvious low hanging fruit of things that need to change. And the plan of what, step one, get the money. Step two, buy the business. Step three, well, step three is fix the things that you already see and that you already know need to be fixed. And that applies to the plumbing business, that applies to an electrician's business, that applies to a local business, it applies to a place that I find across the country, but I have, criteria that I'm familiar with. And the name for this, if it wasn't individuals doing it, would just be private equity,
Yeah.
right? Like, this already exists as a field at scale. I'm not sure what the modernization and digitization of private equity looks like. And I know for certain that individual, aspiring business owners do not want to enter private equity for private equity's sake. They want to enter it
The
because they want
business.
to own
Yeah.
a business. Yeah.
So I wonder how much disruption, how much profitability could you infuse into an aggregate number of mom and pop plumbing companies, or by the just getting the blocking and tackling right. Not anything special, not even like super advanced machine learning route optimization or these diagnostic tools that you could leverage as well, but just getting the blocking and tackling right, scheduling, marketing, things that probably the owner didn't have to worry about. You put your name in the phone book, and between that and word of mouth, you grew your business that way. And
I know one, I'm not going to name the shop. I want to have this guy as a guest at some point, but I know one person that did this successfully, and it's kind of the opposite because he didn't buy into a turnaround. He bought into a company that he was brought into the company as an operations guy, picked up, I mean, I it was a good machine shop, but it was also, there was a healthy culture at the place in a way that would be the envy of any business, whether it was manufacturing or otherwise. So this guy picked up a culture that was thriving and managed to get the money together. I don't think he came in with the intention of purchasing. That may have been an option on the table, but he was not brought in as an heir apparent. He was brought in to run things, and or to help run things. And when the owner or the owners retired, uh, made the purchase and essentially kept things going the way they were, in terms of, make this a good place to work, make this a place where you feel heard when you're an employee, make this the type of place where, ownership has got your back in all things, and there are things that are out of their control, but, make sure good people are promoted, and, bad people are unwelcome here. And that kind of stuff that would apply to any business, but seems pretty rare in a machining and hard goods kind of companies. So he was able to do it successfully, because he picked it up and kind of kept going with something that was already built. So that's sort of the exact opposite. The people I know that have done this with, you know, imagining a turnaround, so far they're all sort of mired in, the turnaround is harder than they thought it would be, or, there were factors that were still headwinds, and it actually is freaking hard to run these places if they were already kind of like on the ropes in any way, and selling at a discount.
yeah, I don't know. It's fascinating. It's again,
I want to know what the lowest buy-in to this is. Like, can I get a buy-in to run one of these experiments for the price of a family car, which at this point means like
so
$75,000.
no,
But
you, here's one of the tools. I've run the risk, obviously, of talking about things that I'm not an expert on, but we're making a habit of that. So there you can do a financing technique, or at least I've read anecdotally about people who have leveraged this technique, where the owner of the business will finance the sale of that business to you as their part of their retirement package too. So
yeah, that makes
they
sense.
you whether it's an actual loan that they secure, a physical loan that they secure, or it's just an equity arrangement that ends up being like a purchase on contract type deal.
Right.
One of those two scenarios, and it's an easy way to get into that thing with no money down, or with no, not a big, the capital barrier for entry is a lot lower than if you were going to go build a startup, to enter into
Yeah.
a real digital tool or something of the sort.
I feel like and this is very specific and personal, but I feel like my threshold is if I can buy a 3-year-old, well-appointed Toyota Camry V6
Well appointed.
for the same price as buying into ownership in a small business. Do I really want that? Do I want that Camry? I don't even know if I said Camry. I might have said an Accord. But anyway, do I want that midsize sedan, or should I be spending that money on buying into a business and seeing what happens? Can I drive the business? Well, drive it into the ground maybe, but that seems to me like if the framing that the average person who sees corporate ownership or business ownership as beyond their means and something that they are not, that it's for somebody else. I think if you frame it in terms of like a thing that would be an everyday purchase, or a not everyday but certainly like a common
Yeah, but no,
purchase.
give me perspective on this. I'm curious. I think you and I are in a small minority. I think there's a, whatever it is, 5%, 3%. Like, the general population wants no part of this conversation. I don't, financially or otherwise. Like, I don't, because there are so many of these types of opportunities today for an ambitious, disciplined person to get into something where you can build even as you have your corporate career with just a modest amount of ambition, you could own a plumbing company and be working on having that. Like, I think about these things all the time. It's all I think about
Yeah.
is what
Right.
is the way for me to build something for myself, because that's what I want to do. I'm wired that way, and I have things coming on that, by the way. But then also, maybe it's my age, I don't know, but I start thinking about legacy for my children and things that I want to leave for them. And I just don't, it doesn't feel like to me, and I think the metrics would bear it out, it doesn't feel like to me the general population is even giving mind space to these types of conversations, because not just buying the plumbing company, there are a million examples with digital and otherwise of things that a person can do if they're ambitious.
If I could wave a magic wand of ambivalence, or what I think is ambivalence, I would like to replace almost all Bitcoin investment advice with
Buy a
pragmatic,
plumbing shop.
bo-
Yes.
boring investment
But so
advice.
we talked about last week, we talked about public policy competency crises, and we're going through a million of them today, of things that in the new economy to impact the future of work, policies that can drive people towards those things. Why doesn't somebody spend some money on advertising in trade schools and some of the in like high school vocational schools? You can buy a plumbing company tomorrow. Don't take out $150,000 student loan. Like,
Right.
go, these are things that you can do tomorrow. Why aren't we encouraging that? Why are we letting, and such a minority of people have even I've seen family members that don't know the first thing about Bitcoin lose real money and on
On Bitcoin?
Bitcoin. It's
I'm sorry to
well,
hear
I
that.
mean, real money for them. But
Well, I mean, I'm just sorry to hear that anybody lost money on Bitcoin. It makes me
I
sad.
knew from the beginning. Well, it's
You heard it here first. Terry knew Bitcoin wasn't going to
no,
work out for retail
no.
investors.
It was too early on. Like the people, there are for the average person that doesn't know like how to time in and out of certain things. That it's too early for average people to make heads or tails of a technology like Bitcoin. And I think whatever, that's not a discussion. That's a losing proposition discussion. But it's I don't know. I think from a policy perspective, there's a lot of low hanging fruit out there that would better society, encourage flourishing. And part of that, in the context of future of work, is go buy some of these small businesses. Go get, work out nuanced, interesting ways to purchase some of these small businesses that are up for grabs.
Can I put a bow on it?
Bow it.
As things become specialized and fragmented, increasingly, but my argument is they've always been complex and fragmented. Terry's saying that they are even more complex and
More
fragmented than ever.
complex.
So let's say things are complex and getting more complex always. Don't forget to make the work about the work, not about the complexity, right? So the closer you stay to what's the thing that we're doing, the easier it will be to manage whatever level of complexity is. And if a thing is too complicated to explain to anybody, including yourself, don't necessarily stay away from it, but think about what the implications are if nobody understands it for the future of actual people who have to actually show up and go to a job, and kids who have to, abandon their childhood dreams of rescuing kittens from a tree as a fireman and instead become, you know,
Streamers.
purchasing analyst 3.
Yeah. Well said. I
There's your bell.
As well said. We actually
Hasta
we
mañana.
actually did fairly well today, staying on topic.
Well, it's something to strive
Few
for.
few few detours, got in the ditch a little bit, but we actually did fairly well staying on topic.
Maybe it's about finding a good rhythm. Let's find it again tomorrow.
All right.
Bye,
Have a
Terry.
good one, man.